With the denuclearization negotiations now in limbo, is it better that President Trump walked away from the table rather than signing a bad deal for America? Here now to debate it is former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama, Joel Rubin, and Republican strategist Chris Nywame. Thank you both for joining us. Wow,
good morning,
not
Heather.
what we expected to happen. Yeah. Chris, I will start with you. What do you think? You know, the president saying sometimes you just have to walk. He didn't want to do a deal. If he had to do it fast, he wanted to do it right.
Sounds about right to me. I mean, the president's a negotiator. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. We have to remember what the president's expectations are, which is complete denuclearization in North Korea. So that's not something that's going to happen right away. We wouldn't have been able to get that with the initial request they wanted with the sanctions. So it's a process. We're working through it. We've been able to get nowhere the last few presidential administrations. This president wants to do it right. And like he said, he'd rather do it right than do it fast. So here we are.
So, Joel, your take on that. We also heard Secretary Pompeo say, you know, adding to that, they want to do a deal that is in the best interest for the U.S.
That's right, Heather. But what this does point out is that nuclear negotiations are very painstaking and difficult. And this president came into office attacking previous nuclear negotiations by President Obama on Iran. His team has taken away a nuclear deal that we've had for 3 decades with Russia, the INF Treaty. And I'm not sure he has the team committed to a nuclear deal in the way that he was envisioning prior to these talks. So we're in a bit of a limbo right now that's very dangerous for national security. There is no military solution to this situation.
We're looking at live pictures right now just to let everyone know they're at home as the president is there at the airport, just about ready to board and head back home here to Washington, D.C. Chris, he did reference other presidents, said many presidents should have done this before me. You see him there entering the plane. But he said, you know, he didn't blame Obama. But he did say that they do believe they did make progress.
Well, they did. I mean, I don't know if the INF Treaty regarding Russia is germane to this because Russia wasn't honoring it, so that's why we made an adjustment there. And I mean, Joel's got a lot of advanced experience in this area. I know they've put a lot of hard work into this, but if things were so successful under Obama, we wouldn't be where we're at here. I mean, we've got to get some work done, and that's what we're doing. It's a process. We've got them talking about things they've never talked about before, giving up the farm. And frankly, I think Kim Jong-un is very sort of confused by the spotlight and all these different pressures, and I think we're in a good place to sort of, you know, get them to knock the ball out of bounds and get something actually done that's meaningful here during this president's term.
I mean, Joel, do you not think that the fact that just they're sitting down face to face is progress that we have not made before?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of diplomacy and I frankly believe that that's the only way out of this box. But the Iran nuclear negotiations didn't happen overnight. And President Trump, when he was engaging in these negotiations,
they also weren't successful.
He kind of argued that it would be easy. They were successful, and they've been verified as successful by the international community, and that took several years. So we need a multi-year commitment. It's not going to happen overnight, and we need a team in place at the White House, frankly, that's going to sustain the negotiations for where President Trump wants to go, and that's not what's happening. He needs to look at this Iran negotiations that have been effective at preventing an Iranian nuclear weapon. That needs to be a model for this negotiation going forward.
But, Chris, I saw you, or I heard you jumping in there. You know, your opinion has not, and a lot of others' opinion is that the Iran negotiations, the Iran nuclear deal, has not been successful because they have not been following what they're supposed to be doing.
Not at all.
But
they have not been, Joel. And the fact of the matter is, you look at what's happening with protest forces. You can't protest in this country. It's completely out of control. It's run by the theocracy, every branch of government. It was a complete failure. So we don't want to stage a failed negotiation on this one. But regardless, we're making progress.
No, a nuclear negotiation is not a comprehensive negotiation. The Iran deal was a nuclear. If we want to talk about broader issues, I can agree with you on that. But there was a nuclear deal, and that's what President Trump has been advocating right now with North Korea. So the nuclear deal, it was verified as effective and is effective. Our allies say so. The international community says so. Our intelligence community says so. Iran doesn't have a bomb.
Right, but if other nations don't honor it, Joel, we got to walk away. Same thing with INF. If they don't honor it, they don't do what they're supposed to do.
But it's also a completely different situation, what we're talking about in terms of North Korea. And apparently, when we went to the table for this round of negotiations, from what I'm understanding, Kim Jong-un came forward. He was willing to do the denuclearization in terms of the site Yongbyon. But we apparently have learned since the Singapore summit of other sites that we wanted to bring to the table. Kim Jong-un was not willing to denuclearize those sites in exchange for all of the sanctions being dropped. He wanted all the sanctions being to be dropped and this one site to be the one that was considered. But we came to the table aware of other sites, other areas that we wanted to include, I should say. So, Joel, we seem to have our ducks in a row. We seem to know what we're doing on that front.
Yeah, and that's important, and I'm glad you brought that up, that the president made it clear to Kim that we know what you're up to, that we know that you're cheating. The problem is that the expectation setting for this summit was so high that it's no wonder that Kim thought he could get more out of it. So they need to recalibrate. They need their teams to be engaging directly, and we need to be clear about real expectations, not shooting for the moon. Love letters is not a good policy.
They've stopped testing missiles. There's a lot of things. This is going pretty positive so far.
Chris, finish that. I couldn't hear the first part of what you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's we're getting hostages back, the rocket test ceasing. I mean, there's been several key components leading up to this, so we're heading in the right direction. I think maybe a third summit would make sense here in the next few months, but we're making progress, much more progress than Joel's homeboy, President Obama. So I think we're doing well.
I think we're moving in the right direction, but we need a lot more progress.
Okay, well, that's something. You did just say you think we're moving in the right direction. Kim Jong-un also apparently promising not to return to nuclear and missile testing. The president also not committing to increasing sanctions, seems to be pulling away from that. He did say, this gave them an opportunity to get to know each other a little better, said that there is a warmth that we have. And then once again, getting into not signing any sort of agreement today. He did say that they had the papers ready. They had the papers ready to go, Chris.
That's right. I mean, I think they have many different options, and all of those policy staff are going to have those available. But at the end of the day, it comes down to negotiating. And the president has been really good at this over the years. You don't know what punch he's going to hit you with, and that's good. We want unpredictable. I mean, some of the language the media gets wrapped around and sort of, why are you speaking so friendly about someone? He's trying to negotiate a favorable deal for our country, and it's something that hasn't been able to be done. Those of us that served in the military, been in the Middle East, we don't want to have wars anymore. We don't want to be engaged in these constant entanglements that, strain our military. And so this is really personal. I know Joel and I want to get this right. We want to make sure we're moving forward, but we want to have all those different options. They're working through them. They're talking through them. I would be surprised if they would have had an agreement today. There's still a lot more work that needs to be done and other options that need to be reviewed.
Joel, what about the joint military exercises with South Korea? He was asked about that as well because he stopped those. His answer had to do with the cost. He said that, that cost us $100 million every time we do it. So listening to his answer, it does seem like he's not going to start those back up again either.
Well, those exercises are not a favor to anybody. They're for our national security and for the security of our allies. But and also to add to that, if he were to restart them, that would send a very negative signal to Kim after the failure of this summit. But the big picture is we can't really portray this as a win. Both sides need to go back home and figure out what their real negotiating tactics are and what their objectives are and come clean with each other. Clearly, this summit, both had different expectations. They were ready to sign an agreement. They said they were going to in the presser prior to the luncheon, and that didn't come about. So they need to recalibrate and not take any actions that could undermine confidence going forward. Was
there anything in terms of the news conference that we just heard as we continue to wait for the president to take off and head home that stood out to you? It was kind of wide-ranging once they started taking questions from some of the reporters there. He was asked about, peace in the Middle East. He was asked about negotiations with China. He says at this point he has not spoken with either China, Japan, or South Korea in reference to these negotiations falling apart.
So structurally, I think that the president kind of implied that he was alone in this negotiation. That's dangerous. South Korea has played a very effective role of bringing the U.S. and North Korea together. Japan is a primary ally of our country, and they have deep concerns about these negotiations, ensuring that they work for them. So that stood out to me. But also the president's language, it's strong in the sense of not wanting to denigrate Kim, and he should continue with that. The fire and fury language, that needs to stay in the past. We can't go back to that phase. Otherwise, we're going to get back into a negative cycle that will be much worse than where we were a year ago.
Chris?
I mean, we've had no engagement that's failed, and now we have engagement that's moving along. So, I mean, if you look at those three options, I think we're in a good place, and we're aiming high, and I think that's what we should be trying to do. So hopefully they'll come together with an agreement that works for our country.
Secretary Pompeo said that in terms of some of the progress that was made, that they now know a little bit better what the limits are in terms of both sides and what the challenges are with both sides. He said that, we wish we could have gotten further, but he remains optimistic. And this is according to Secretary Pompeo, hopes to make a deal in the weeks ahead. Do you think that that is possible as we see Air Force One taking off?
I think that might be optimistic in terms of the timeline, but this gets to a point that came out of the Singapore summit prior, which is the definition of denuclearization. They still haven't defined that publicly. I don't think there's an agreement there. So a lot of painstaking detail we were talking about earlier, it needs to be hammered out. Secretary Pompeo needs to get on paper what he means, and the North Koreans have to agree to that or some other kind of version for a negotiation to really work. I don't want to set an expectation. I think Chris would agree with this as well, and he's implying this, that in 3 weeks, if we don't have a deal, it's all broken. No, we need to give the president space to be successful, but they need to get things on paper and start building blocks for a successful negotiation. Chris,
finally, you comment on that in terms of the definition of denuclearization, because our John Roberts actually asked the president about that. He said in terms of Kim Jong-un's vision, that his vision is closer to ours than it was a year ago.
Well, I think he's always trying to give himself an escape hatch to go back to bad behavior if he needs to, and we want to eliminate that. But again, we have to go back one step. We've got the missiles. We're not doing the missile tests anymore. But I think what that would look like is deactivating those facilities, disbanding them, and ultimately having either inspectors go in there or destroy them, essentially.
And he also said that he thinks that in terms of the differences that the two sides still have, that he believes that they can be bridged with time. Joel, how much time?
I do not want to put a cap on time on this. I think that Kim has a longer time horizon because he's a dictator and he can stay in office for the next 30 years, clearly. But we don't have a limited time, but we should not make an unnatural endpoint. The president needs to have enough space to get this right, but he can't come back home and ignore it for the next few months. We have to be immediately the next day, tomorrow, hammering this out. He has to get with Congress. Congress has been asking for more information, very concerned. They're not getting it. They need to get in the room with Congress and get some clear definitions and negotiations. I know it's hard, but sanctions, let's remember this, at the end of the day, Congress has to lift sanctions for it to be permanent. Right. President Obama didn't get that with the Congress, the Republican Congress. President Trump needs to be careful that he has Congress on his side if he's going to cut a deal to get sanctions lifted.
Chris,
we had this problem 20 years ago as well with North Korea, so it's not a new problem.
Yeah, Chris, let's talk about that a little bit more in terms of Congress, because the president was asked about that. The drama in D.C. In reference to the Cohen hearings yesterday, he said, having a fake hearing in the middle of this very important summit was incredible, and Cohen lied about a lot, but he didn't lie about collusion.
I know. I thought it was kind of humorous what the president said. I mean, just go the 100%, go the 100 yards of lying instead of 90%. I mean, the fact is, I want to see Michael Cohen talk in reverse, just an interview. Just do it in reverse and see if he can keep his story going backwards. What did you just say in reverse? He would melt. I understand the president's concern. Look, we know about the war back and forth between the House Democrats and the president. I would agree. These are much more important things that are going on the world stage for our country, for our military, for the world. And look, I mean, all these years, all this stuff that's come out, I mean, we've seen scandals with past presidents that blow this out of the water, and yet with the president, it is like we're looking for something that's not there. So I would agree that it's a witch hunt. You know, the partisanship. I mean, I think we're onto something better here in North Korea. And hopefully, I think Joel would agree, we need to focus on the things that are important. And we are making progress, and we are getting to where we need to go. And they are sort of distractions.
Yeah, the partisanship was rampant yesterday. It was disappointing. Joel and Chris,
sure.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate this breaking news situation. The president now there on Air Force One, taking off and heading home. We'll see what happens next. Thank you.
Thanks for having us,
Thanks,
Heather.
Heather.
Have a good day.